Hazard, a situation that poses a level of threat to life, health, property, or the environment. Once a hazard becomes active, it can create an emergency situation. Waste, unwanted substances or objects which are required to be disposed of by the provisions of national law.
Hazardous waste is a new development that comes with the current lifestyle that we have. The word hazardous refers to the characteristics of a particular thing. For example, it could be a highly flammable thing, or it could be explosive in nature. The exposure to hazardous waste is almost invariably a human rights issue. The generations that came before us had to liberate Africa from colonialism. We have an obligation as the present generation to liberate Africa from the jaws of hazardous waste that destroy our lives. The Africa Institute has been established fundamentally to bring home the solutions and try to find homegrown solutions to the decisions that are being taken at an international level.
Hazardous chemicals pose a major problem in Africa and the developing world.
The chemicals that you're talking about are the industrial chemicals, the chemicals that are being used to produce certain materials. But even among those chemicals, there's an element of the pesticides, the chemicals that are used to kill the pests in agriculture, even at home and so forth. Those really create one of the major streams of hazardous waste.
Chemicals are found all around us within our households. They are found in our agricultural systems. They are used for cleaning. They are used everywhere. They form the medicines that support our lifestyles. But we need to realize the inherent danger that is within the chemicals.
These chemicals are so dangerous that once exposed, sometimes you die. The processes are actually disrupted, the bodily processes.
If they have reached their end of life, they need to be disposed of in an environmentally sound manner. They are not necessarily meant to go to a landfill.
The problem which we have seen with obsolete chemicals is that nobody wants to take ownership. We need to have a system in place which will make people responsible for the waste.
We still do not know how much is there. We still do not know exactly how to manage them.
Hazardous chemicals is a waste stream that easily crosses borders. The management for information relating to the proper handling of chemicals and pesticides has long since been a challenge for many countries.
The biggest challenge with regards to chemicals and pesticides, there isn't the same or conformity in terms of labeling. Why labeling is important? Labeling is just the first thing you come face to face with when you're handling, whether it's an industrial chemical or a pesticides. There should be basic information, precautionary information that should be there. You should wear protective clothing. So at the moment, there isn't a standardized system.
Labeling is extremely essential because labels form the basis of information between the companies or institutions and the farmers. We don't do any labeling here. Everything comes straight from the suppliers. The bottles come sealed. What we do is that as we're ordering, we liaise with our suppliers and what kind of information has to be put on the label.
We import a lot of chemicals and then in big containers. And then we redistribute them by repackaging them. So more often, the labeling is not good.
Chemicals are top priority in Zambia, particularly with the fact that they have an impact on the environment, either in their virgin state or as hazardous waste. We have identified labeling as one of the key priorities to achieve sound chemical management. And this is because a label is a primary source of information to protect users as well as the environment. We found that initially, in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of labeling systems have been on the market, which caused confusion to end users. So the international community, through the United Nations, came up with the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling of chemicals. Zambia has been pioneering the adoption of the globally harmonized system, and with me, basically, this is a UN document. It's acts as a guide or it's a standard at an international level. So using this standard, we have been able to develop regulations to govern classification and labeling of chemicals. Practically what the law means is that all new chemicals have to be labeled according to GHS. The main reason for this is to ensure or enhance sound chemical management. So once the label is easy to understand, then the end users and all people involved along the supply chain of chemicals will be able to use chemicals safely.
The globally harmonized system of labeling of chemicals has greatly helped us because I think it's something that has been agreed at the global level. I think it's a good thing.
Zambian government, I think, is a good model in terms of chemicals management. They've implemented the food GHS and they've gotten support from the United Nations Environment Project in implementing projects on chemicals management.
The system is going to change. We as industry are excited about it, mainly on the regulation part. You will have industry regulated. Biggest challenge that we'll have as a company is getting our suppliers to comply with the regulation that the government has brought on board. I'll give you a situation where multinational companies cannot produce a certain amount of labels for a small market. So we yet to see as industry just how much the change the statutory instrument is going to bring to this.
Pesticides and chemicals which are entering the country. This is an area of some difficulties because it relates to control of what comes in. The question is how you handle these chemicals, how you bring them in the country.
What we are doing in Africa is to try to take the inventories, to try to establish where are these chemicals and which chemicals are there, so that we can also then come up with management and options and so forth.
Currently, as a country, we are working with the neighboring countries, that's South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, to have a universal labeling system. And then also, in that case, we can track the chemicals getting in and out of the country.
Whether it's agriculture, whether it's environment, whether it's trade and industry, we should be able to know, all of us at any time, what comes in. We should be able to have updated information at all times.
The pesticides and toxic substances regulations require that the importer needs to supply to the agency the material safety data sheet for that product, and also needs to get authorization from the original manufacturer and produce the certificate of analysis. Then the agency issues an importation license to such an individual. And one of the requirements is that the label itself also has to be approved, because the label has to contain information on the use of the product, the hazards associated with that particular product. So that information should be contained on a label before the agency can approve.
We definitely believe it's a good thing. It's like I said, industry has to be regulated. Things have to be done professionally and properly. Then, we believe we'll have players that are there that are responsible in their use of products, and of course that are here for a very long time in terms of sustainable business.
Another problem is of that also goes with labeling is the fact that without that labeling, even the people, even an advanced industry would not really know how to deal with that, or how to protect themselves from that, or finally how to process it so that it becomes non-toxic.
So there are policy and regulatory issues, plus awareness issues. People are not aware of the hazard signs on the label. That's where the GHS comes in. Awareness is very low.
Pesticides, you sell them to people out there. The farmers simply use them without the correct personal protection.
We have been farming here in Botswana since 2001. We are a small-scale horticultural farm. We are very, very conscious of pesticides, insecticides. However, Botswana is a country that does have a lot of insects. We do have fairly substantial problems with insects, and so it seems to be a necessary part of what we do, unfortunately.
Maintaining the integrity of the environment in terms of, biodiversity resources. We need to, protect the environment from pollution. It should be part and parcel of any development that we do, especially for developments that we know they will have negative impacts on the environment.
We do use a fairly wide variety of chemicals. Insects become resistant if you stick to the same chemical, so you do find yourself having to alternate.
We use a lot of chemicals for crop production. So it's a problem because most of it is being handled by farmers, and then some of these farmers they're illiterate, they can't read.
There is a challenge with the workers because most of my workers, they are illiterate. You try and drill into them that the chemicals are very dangerous and so on, but they don't see it the way I see it. Sometimes you ask them to go and spray. You put half the kit because he doesn't see the need of it.
We are at the Minister of Agricultural Seed Storage, where they store seeds and as well as some pesticides. It's not the policy to store the seeds and the pesticides all together in one storage. Word poison is universal. People know what is poison, but when you talk corrosive, they'll not know what corrosive means. And this is really a concern because, awareness is important, that people should know this can actually affect their lives.
My main worry is the exposure to the people working in here. They come and work in here because they don't have anywhere else. This is the only shelter, because if they go and work outside, then it's very hot, so it becomes a hazard. And we don't even have proper protective clothing for them. And if they're not properly protected, they're not covering their noses. So my main concern is with the health hazard.
The chemicals and pesticides create a problem at two levels. The major problem that it creates is the exposure of the workers, the people who are working with them. Another problem is that our communities, the people in the villages and so forth, they take the empty containers, once it has been empty, they take it and use it in their homesteads.
These chemicals are sold to ordinary people to go and use in their field, and these containers, they take them with, and what they do with them, nobody knows.
They may be throwing them away, they may be reusing them for storage of water, they may be using them for other purposes that they are not supposed to be using them for.
They use it to fetch water and so forth, and then you get all these kind of problems of poisoning of the people. That is basically the major element of this.
It's a big concern with what happens to the used up empty containers. Quite a number of times, people, especially in rural settings, they use these containers to fetch water. And these are containers that contain hazardous products in them.
Those containers are finding themselves at markets, people putting water there, and then you have poisoning.
One of our biggest concerns as far as this market is concerned is the use of pesticide containers. They clean them with water, they rinse them up, but that's not very effective because a number of these containers are corrosive substances, and others don't even have labels, so people don't even know what it was in the container. And unfortunately, they use them for drinking purposes, to carry their water in the house, and so those are hazards that would explode in the future. The women are the majority buying it, and the literacy levels are not that high for them to know what is happening.
The signs are there, sign of skull and bone. It can kill, but the guy who's selling doesn't understand the word of these hazard signs. It's like a lady's handbag or shoe. They just sell it.
As an agency, we would want these containers that they are properly disposed of, maybe by the firms that bring them in the country. We have in our law the extended producer responsibility, which places responsibility on the producer at the end of life of the particular product. So in this case, in terms of the containers, the main distributors should take responsibility for the containers that they bring in so that they are safely disposed of.
We try to tell them to bring back the empty containers so that we can send them away for recycling, but they never come back. So collection of those empty containers, for us, is still a challenge. We still have to find a way how we could institute some means of collecting the empty containers. Once they are sold, then how they could come back to us.
What should happen after farmers have used these products is to return them back to the distributor so that the distributor can offer them to these companies that recycle most of these empty plastic containers.
Botswana has a very good container management system in place. The Udi Investment Farm is but one of many farms that work closely with the Botswana government to contain the danger these polluted containers pose.
We generally use a 5-litre container if whatever it is. When we finish it, that empty container comes out of our store and goes into a store where we keep empty containers. We then call the ministry. They will come around on phone call. If they haven't heard from us for a month or two, they'll just come in and visit us and take away all of our empty chemicals. Every single container that's taken off the farm is notarized, okay, signed for by them. We throw nothing away on the farm. Containers can too easily be reused by people, so it all gets taken away by the ministry.
The government of Botswana, through district staff, goes out to the farms and collect empty containers.
The Waste Management Department, as a regulator, we regulate pollution. We conduct audits and inspections of all waste generating facilities in the country. Through our Waste Management Act, we also license waste carriers and waste facilities.
It is the government's arrangement that these obsolete stocks are collected from the farmers through some arrangement through district offices, and they are brought to the central lockup store in Sibili in Gaborone.
They are currently, putting all this in one place. It's not a safe site, to put chemicals. It's not even a controlled site. It's not even a containment site.
The issue of chemicals and pesticides was identified as early as the 90s, and the problem of Africa was basically obsolete pesticides, those that are expired, those that have not been used. Those highly hazardous chemicals were actually put in what we call encapsulation. All you're saying is you're actually putting them in a mine. You're just encapsulating them with cement and some stuff and then put them underground. But others have actually been treated and processed and then mixed with earth and then put in a landfill. We don't have those options anymore except just putting them in a lined landfill, in which case we try to make them more solid and then put them there and hope that the future generations won't mine them out.
What we realized is that we buy in, that is, as the industry, the farmers. And maybe something, pesticide is cheap, then you get bulk loads coming in.
At Adam Sepo, we are using pesticides and fungicides. The availability is one other thing which forced us to go to South Africa to buy the chemicals. And we buy in large quantities so that we can stock a bit.
And then it expires, then becomes obsolete.
To prevent these large amounts of chemicals and pesticides landing up in landfills, the stockpile program was created. This project aims to assemble all hazardous chemicals into central locations to be easily collected and shipped into countries that have the correct infrastructure in place to dispose of these substances in proper manner.
What's behind me right now is the expired products. We are stockpiling them in readiness for collection by the Zambia Environmental Management Agency. We cannot just dispose them because we understand the hazardous.
The agricultural sector is not the only area that has this problem with obsolete stock. The educational system has similar challenges.
Schools need to have chemicals because students need to do practical science. And for students to do practical science, they have to use chemicals. The challenges that we are facing currently is that over the years, the chemicals have accumulated, and some have expired, some are old, and they have accumulated in the science laboratory storerooms.
Chemicals in schools. It is a major problem. Through the Basel Convention and in collaboration with Ministry of Education and Skills Development, we did this inventory of schools' chemicals. And we realized that, it is a potential area of pollution. It is a dangerous situation as we are talking at the moment.
The concern is that this may pose a health hazard to both the students, teachers, and the general community of the school.
Some of the chemicals that we use, yes, they can be hazardous, like sodium, lithium, the group 1 metals. If they mix with water, they can actually cause a serious explosion.
Going forward, we need to put better management strategies in schools, intensify the education and awareness. The education and awareness is very, very critical to the users of those pesticides to say, only buy what is enough. Different chemicals should be categorized and put in the right places. Chemicals should be treated or transported, treated and disposed of in an environmentally sound manner.
The challenge for the government of Botswana is that we don't have a disposal facility for chemicals.
At this point in time, there are very few institutions on the African continent that are capable of dealing with hazardous goods or hazardous waste in general. So for that, a lot of countries, you will realize that once they collect these chemicals, they're actually stockpiling them.
The system is proven not to be sustainable because we end up having a lot of chemicals in our hands. And as a result, even if this central lockup store gets full, we end up not knowing where exactly are we going to keep these obsolete stocks.
Under the African Stockpile Project, there is no hazardous chemical facility, treatment facility.
Pesticides and medical waste relates to having proper disposal sites.
Clinical waste, as you know, is very, very hazardous. It contains pathogens, it contains bacteria, it contains viruses which are deadly to public health. We need them to be managed properly.
It is in practice that persistent organic pollutants, PCBs or DDTs, should be incinerated in the specialized incinerators, which is not found in Africa.
So it has to be shipped back to Europe or elsewhere. That creates its own problem of Basel Convention, because this has hazardous waste. So following the prior informed consent of Basel, every country through that ship will pass through has to give a consent. That can take years and so on.
The waste itself becomes a transboundary element. That is why there's a need for countries to actually work together.
I think it's a common problem throughout Africa. African countries should come up with a solution to solve this problem.
Africa is a global village. I mean, the movement from one country to another is quite easy compared to other continents.
To me, that's a compelling reason to look for a facility in Africa to establish such. We can't afford to have many, but definitely we need one in Africa to handle such things.
Although Africa does not have a major incineration plant, some hospitals have their own smaller incineration plants to deal with their own medical waste.
It's also a question of proper collection and the proper disposal, because after incineration, you may end up with some byproducts of your incineration, which ends up at a specified hazardous waste disposal site.
Most of the medical waste is being incinerated at the hospital, Katutura Central Hospital, and then the ash also comes to Koevoorburg, but also what they cannot incinerate, we just trench it here on site. Yeah.
Although some hospitals only dispose of their hazardous ash at these landfills, inevitably expired chemicals and pesticides also find their way here.
We are still having a challenge of hazardous waste, including sludge, whatever industrial chemicals, because sometimes they are being dumped in the dump site, which is not a proper way. So we are looking for a solution to that. One solution is to prevent the accumulation that you order which you are sure that you will use it. That is the first. If it is 100 tons required, then you order 100 tons required, not order over. And also, we are supposed to put in place regulatory system. There must be a good segregation and sorting from the source so that each category of chemicals will be treated depending on their own.
Mauritius has a healthy chemical industry. The government works closely with the manufacturers to look for alternative methods of dealing with chemical products.
As regards the liquid hazardous waste, this is where the bulk of it is the problem. We have got a lot of it in terms of organic solvent.
We should be looking at waste as a resource that we can, as a country, generate some benefits. And one of the benefits is, waste recovery.
We have encouraged the private sector, the paint industry, to do some solvent recovery. Some of them are going for that. We have also encouraged them to go for material substitution, that they use less of hazardous chemicals. And we also encouraging them to go for recycling activity.
We are very busy working on reducing the use of this chemical through our research and development. We've been using water-based products. We have implemented our solvent recovery plant, which makes us reuse nearly 90% of our solvent instead of having 100% waste.
In the future, we are developing regulations and policies which will guide the management of those hazardous waste.
Regulation to be enforced to ensure that those who are handling hazardous chemicals are well trained in hazard and risk management.
Our legislation should be very smart so that each dealer in pesticide or industrial chemicals should know their fate, that they are responsible for disposal of the remains of the expired one and associated with waste with those chemicals and pesticides.
Environmental management issues. It should be part and parcel of any development that we do, especially for developments that we know they will have negative impacts on the environment.
We are supposed also to look for alternative of use, not always depend on using of pesticide in agricultural input. We are supposed to look for the alternative also.
As you walk around the farm, you will see that we have managed to eradicate a certain amount of insects by the use of marigolds, basil, natural pesticides. We have quite a strong emphasis on that. I would love to see us becoming organic. We're not there yet, but we would love to have assistance with it. I'm hoping that that's an area that is going to be picked up by the ministry in the next year or two.
I would wish so much that maybe we can have the organic way of controlling. If we could have that, which are less toxicities at all, and still harvesting, I'll be very happy.
It goes back to try and minimize chemical use. Have we exhausted all the mechanical methods? Have we exhausted all the biological methods? Have we exhausted all other sanitation, field sanitation, all these other methods? If we have not, how do we bring them together and make them integrated such that at least we have an integrated approach to management of our crop pests such that chemical use becomes one of the last alternatives?
The proper handling and disposal of chemicals and pesticides are a great challenge for the African continent. But with ingenuity and care, we can minimize the threat of these hazardous waste streams.
The environment is not a gift from our parents, but a loan from our children. What legacy are we leaving behind for children yet to come?
We must be able to work together as a continent so that we can support each other and borrow from the best practices.
Sharing the experiences, doing things in uniform, minimizing each other's burden.
I wish to see the future generations on this continent living in a continent that is prosperous, that is free of hazardous waste, where they can harness the potential that they possess as individuals.